Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Nate Silver is, by any measure, a pretty remarkable statistician. In 2008, in the US presidential election, Nate Silver correctly predicted the outcome in 49 of the 50 states. 4 years later, he correctly predicted the winner in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. A couple of weeks ago, with no sign of an end to the momentum of Donald Trump, Nate Silver wrote an article headlined, "Dear Media, Stop Freaking Out About Donald Trump's Polls." Nate Silver sought to put it in perspective by writing, "Right now he has 25 to 30% of the vote in polls among the roughly 25% of Americans who identify as Republican. That's something like 6 to 8% of the electorate overall, or about the same share of people who think the Apollo moon landings were faked." Nate Silver concluded his article by asking, could Trump win? He wrote, "We confront two stubborn facts. First, that nobody remotely like Trump has won a major party nomination in the modern era. And second, as is always a problem in analysis of presidential campaigns, we don't have all that many data points, so unprecedented events can occur with some regularity. For my money," he wrote, "that adds up to Trump's chances being higher than zero, but considerably less than 20%. And yet Donald Trump is still attracting most of the attention in the race to become the Republican Party nominee for the White House. The things he says and the way he says them have pushed him way ahead of other more established candidates, such as Jeb Bush, who are spending much more money than Donald Trump. When his remarks cause outrage among his many critics, Donald Trump rarely apologizes, choosing instead to up the ante, or to launch personal attacks on those who've condemned his remarks. Every time someone asks, has Trump gone too far this time, it appears to do him no harm. His latest comments, that all Muslims should be banned from entering the United States for a while, have, for the first time, provoked Downing Street into saying something.
In America, the Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump has faced widespread condemnation after his latest campaign speech. He told supporters that all Muslims should be prevented from entering the United States. David Cameron said his words were divisive and simply wrong. The billionaire, who's made a series of controversial remarks throughout the presidential race, issued his call after last week's mass shooting in California. Nick Bryant reports.
Donald J. Trump.
His dream of becoming president has been propelled by his wealth and celebrity, and also his hardline stance on immigration. But Donald Trump is now advocating a policy Americans ordinarily associate with far-right hate groups, a blanket ban on foreign Muslims entering the country.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
The more outrageous his remarks, the more cheers and support he seems to get.
We have no choice. We have no choice.
They've helped make him the front runner for the Republican nomination.
His GOP rivals call him unhinged and offensive.
So this morning on breakfast television, he seemed almost to revel in the criticism.
We have people that want to blow up our buildings, our cities, and we have to figure out what's going on.
Last week's attack in San Bernardino has spread fears through America about the threat from homegrown terrorism, and there are some who've applauded his comments.
I think it's a good idea with everything that's going on in the world right now. I mean, it sounds harsh, but reality's reality.
I say ship them all back.
More striking, though, has been the acid shower of criticism. This newspaper compared Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler. American Muslims have also expressed outrage.
Donald Trump sounds more like a leader of a lynch mob than a great nation like ours.
The dominant view is that shutting out Muslims would be un-American and unconstitutional. It's worth remembering these weren't off-the-cuff remarks. They were the product of political calculation. Donald Trump is a shrewd businessman who knows that an extreme stance on immigration, however controversial, however offensive, has become his main selling point. But to many, he's devaluing the very notion of a United States of America and trashing this country's international brand. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Washington.
Republicans and Democrats in America, and Muslims pretty well everywhere, Donald Trump directed his anti-Islam rhetoric on London today. The Republican presidential contender said parts of the city were so radicalised that police feared for their lives.
Well, that was after saying all Muslims should be banned from entering the United States. Tonight, a spokesman for President Obama said he should be disqualified from running. From the States, Martin Geisler reports.
Even by Donald Trump's somewhat eccentric standards, this was extreme.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
It played well with the South Carolina crowd, but Trump's rivals for the Republican nomination rushed to distance themselves from his remarks.
He's a race-baiting, xenophobic, religious bigot. And you know how you make America great again? Tell Donald Trump to go to hell.
Why is Donald Trump doing this?
Once again, America's maverick would-be president has torn up the debate and polarized public opinion. There was only one topic being discussed on the phone-in shows today.
Should we round up all Muslims and we put them in camps?
Did that work?
Would you support
that? I guess that worked. Let's try that. Let's try something.
Really? Tom?
Yes.
Tom, you are actually saying that?
It's pretty obvious, and it's been obvious for a long time that Donald Trump is clinically challenged.
Predictably, understandably, America's Muslim community has reacted with dismay.
He's trying to put a division between Muslims and American Muslims and the population in general. And that's something that is really unfortunate for someone who claims to be a leader.
Donald Trump has had one key strategy throughout his presidential campaign: to get attention by whatever means necessary, and it's working. But by straying beyond republicanism and into Islamophobia, he may now have gone too far, even for his own hardline support.
Things are happening.
Far from reining his remarks in, Mr. Trump went further this morning, providing this analysis to a TV breakfast show.
We have places in London and other places that are so radicalized that the police are afraid for their own lives. We have to be very smart and very vigilant.
This could be a calculated strategy. Equally, these may simply have been passing thoughts. As so often with Donald Trump, it's almost impossible to tell. Martin Geisler, ITV News, Wisconsin.
Here, David Cameron made his feelings clear, saying Donald Trump was divisive, unhelpful and quite simply wrong. Well, our political correspondent Libby Vina is at Westminster for us. And Libby, this is a rare intervention in an American election by the Prime Minister.
Yes, very rare indeed. As one MP put it to me today, this is not funny, it's dangerous. And I think it's pretty clear that the Prime Minister agrees, allowing his spokeswoman to comment on Donald Trump's comments on banning Muslims from coming into the United States, and saying that he was completely wrong. Now, Number 10 wouldn't be drawn on whether he should be banned for those comments because of their inflammatory nature, but it wasn't hard to find MPs who said he should.
Do we want, just as we reject other hate preachers, somebody who has condemned an entire religion coming to the United Kingdom, using such language and spreading hatred about Muslims and their religion? I don't think that's going to help us in our fight against Daesh, which must be at the forefront of all that we're doing at the moment.
Well, I'm not sure whether Donald Trump really cares what British politicians think about him, but the sense here at Westminster is that most politicians across the spectrum would be deeply uncomfortable with the idea of him becoming the Republican nominee, let alone president. And highly unusually, Scotland Yard have also intervened tonight, saying they wouldn't dignify his comments with a comment normally, but they did believe his suggestion that there were no-go areas in London needed to be addressed, and on that they said he couldn't be more wrong.
OK, Libby, thanks very much.
This latest episode, here are some of Donald Trump's most controversial comments of the campaign so far.
What's happened? Today, the leading Republican candidate for president, Donald Trump, gave an interview to Yahoo Politics, which Yahoo wrote up as follows, quote, Yahoo News asked Mr. Trump whether his push for increased surveillance of American Muslims could include warrantless searches. He suggested he would consider a series of drastic measures. Yahoo News asked Mr. Trump whether this level of tracking of American Muslims might require registering Muslims in a database or giving them a form of special identification that noted their religion. Mr. Trump would not rule it out.
Mr. Trump, why would Muslim databases not be the same thing as requiring Jews to register in Nazi Germany? Is there a difference between requiring Muslims to register in Jews?
You tell me.
Nazi Germany?
You tell me.
Do you believe?
Why don't you tell me?
Do you believe there is?
You tell me.
At least in the way the reporter wrote it up. And so, yeah, that interview and that story have had a big impact today, as you can see from all the headlines about it. Also from responses like this one from one American Jewish group, which said in response to this Yahoo News article, quote, registering everyone of a certain religion to a list? We've seen that. It doesn't end well.
In June, he had this to say about Mexico.
The U.S. has become a dumping ground for everybody else's problems. Thank you. It's true. And these are the best and the finest. When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're not sending you. They're not sending you. They're sending people that have lots of problems, and they're bringing those problems with us. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people. But I speak to border guards, and they tell us what we're getting. And it only makes common sense. It only makes common sense. They're sending us not the right people. It's coming from more than Mexico. It's coming from all over South and Latin America, and it's coming probably from the Middle East. But we don't know, because we have protection, and we have no competence. We don't know what's happening. And it's got to stop. And it's got to stop fast.
How to keep Mexicans out?
I would build a great wall, and nobody builds walls better than me, believe me. And I'll build them very inexpensively. I will build a great, great wall on our southern border, and I will have Mexico pay for that wall. Mark my words.
During a televised debate in August, Donald Trump clashed repeatedly with one of the moderators, Megyn Kelly from Fox News. Afterwards, he spoke to CNN and appeared to suggest her manner was down to her menstrual cycle.
Talk about Megyn Kelly, because you brought her up. She did push you, pushed a lot of people, but what is it with you and Megyn Kelly?
Well, I just don't respect her as a journalist. I have no respect for her. I don't think she's very good. I think she's highly overrated. But when I came out there, what am I doing? I'm not getting paid for this. I go out there, and they start saying, "Lift up your arm if you're going to." I didn't know there'd be 24 million people. I figured, but I knew it was going to be a big crowd because I get big crowds. I get ratings. They call me the ratings machine. So I have, she gets out and she starts asking me all sorts of ridiculous questions. And, you could see there was blood coming out of her eyes, blood coming out of her wherever. But she was, in my opinion, she was off base.
Last month, many commentators thought at a rally in South Carolina, Donald Trump mocked a reporter with disabilities.
Right after a couple of good paragraphs, it's talking about northern New Jersey, draws the prober's eye, written by a nice reporter. Now the poor guy, you got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember. He's going like, I don't remember. Maybe that's what I said.
Kowaleski suffers from a physical disability that limits the movement of his arms.
And to bring us almost up to date to last night, again in South Carolina, Donald Trump said this.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. We have no choice. We have no choice.
Here, the Prime Minister's official spokeswoman responded to that by saying the Prime Minister completely disagrees with the comments made by Donald Trump, which are divisive, unhelpful, and quite simply wrong. Our Washington correspondent, Barbara Plett-Usher, has this analysis.
Eddie, Mr. Trump did a round of interviews this morning and he was completely unapologetic. He even compared his proposals to the policies of Franklin D. Roosevelt, who you remember interred 100,000 Americans during World War II based on their ethnicity. Although Mr. Trump had to row back on that one just a bit.
Well, the question is, how would they figure out what was going on, and how would you know that people are Muslims that are coming into the country? And that is, it's not on any passport in the world. And you say you have a lot of support. Cover of the Philadelphia Daily News right now. I want to show it to our viewers right now. It shows the new furor over Donald Trump, showing you raising your hand in a pretty demonstrative gesture. And we have from Ibrahim Hooper of the Council on American Islamic Relations saying, are we talking internment camps? Are we talking the final solution to the Muslim question? I feel like I'm back in the 30s. You're increasingly being compared to Hitler. Does that give you any pause at all?
No, because what I'm doing is no different than what FDR's solution for Germans, Italians, Japanese, many years ago.
So you're for internment camps?
This is a president who was highly respected by all. He did the same thing. If you look at what he was doing, it was far worse. I mean, he was talking about the Germans because we're at war. We are now at war. We have a president that doesn't want to say that, but we are now at war.
I've got to press you on that, sir. So you're praising FDR there. I take it you're praising the setting up of internment camps for Japanese during World War II?
No, I'm not. Take a look at presidential proclamations 25-25, 25-26, and 25-27, having to do with alien Germans, alien Italians, alien Japanese. I mean, what they did. They stripped them of their naturalization proceedings. They went through a whole list of things. They couldn't go 5 miles from their homes. They weren't allowed to use radios, flashlights. I mean, take a look at what FDR did many years ago. And he's one of the most highly respected presidents respected by most people. They named highways after him.
You want to bring back policies like that?
No, I don't want to bring it back, George, at all. I don't like doing it at all. It's a temporary measure until our representatives, many of whom are grossly incompetent, until our representatives can figure out what's going on.
To be clear, Mr. Trump is proposing to bar a quarter of the world's population from entering the U.S. based on their religion. He claimed the security threat demanded such extreme measures. He also claimed countries that had not been vigilant enough about Muslim visitors, cities like Paris and London that had open arms, as he called it, were paying for it now.
We have places in London and other places that are so radicalized that the police are afraid for their own lives. We have to be very smart and very vigilant.
Well, we don't really have places like London that are so radicalized the police are afraid for their own lives. Even the Met Police felt compelled to say Mr. Trump could not be more wrong and offer him a briefing on the reality of policing in London. And Boris Johnson, well, he was Boris Johnson, he called this complete and utter nonsense. He said crime had fallen steadily in London as well as in New York, and the only reason he wouldn't go to some parts of New York, he said, is the real risk of meeting Donald Trump. And Zach Goldsmith, the man who wants to succeed Boris Johnson as mayor, said this Mr. Trump was one of the most malignant figures in modern politics. What's interesting about the response here in the U.S. is that Mr. Trump has united Republican officialdom in condemnation, including presidential candidates, which is unprecedented. Even the former Republican Vice President Dick Cheney, who's been criticized plenty for his own hawkish views, has denounced Mr. Trump's plan.
I think this whole notion that somehow we can just say no more Muslims, just ban a whole religion, goes against everything we stand for and believe in. I mean, religious freedom's been a very important part of our history and where we came from. A lot of people, like my ancestors, got here because they were Puritans. There wasn't anybody here then when they came, but it's a mistaken notion.
It's not clear if Mr. Trump will pay a political price for all this. Every time he's said something outrageous before, his poll numbers have gone up. And he has strong support from elements of the Republican base, Christian evangelicals, and some white middle-class voters who feel threatened by outsiders, economically and also because of security. Plus, generally, the fear of Muslims has increased after the Paris attacks and, of course, even more after the California attacks.
I just believe that we have to be more careful.
What other religion has it so that to gain things you kill people? I don't get it. We're going to have to check you out. And if you have a problem with that, then you're off the list.
When you speak of a Middle Eastern or somebody Muslim or something like that, what's the first thought that comes to your head, you know?
Well, there's fear in the country, but I think the greatest fear of the Republican establishment is that Mr. Trump will actually survive this and go on to be the Republican nominee for president. And then, if he faces a general electorate, not only will he lose the battle for the White House, but the fear is that he would lose the Republican hold on Congress. And many Republicans are aware that Democratic opponents like Hillary Clinton are making political capital off of the back of this call to ban Muslims. So for them, it's a nightmare that's not going away, Eddie.
Barbara Plate-Usher. Robert Schlesinger is managing editor of opinion for the website US News and World Report. We'll come on to talk about the White House, but what, Robert Schlesinger, does Donald Trump have to do to win the Republican nomination?
Well, he has to win enough primaries and caucuses to get enough delegates to get the nomination. But I think I agree with you. You quoted Nate Silver earlier. The chances that thankfully remain fairly low.
Why?
If you look historically, Silver said in the modern era, no one like Trump has ever been nominated. It's actually in all of U.S. history, no major party has ever nominated somebody lacking in either political experience or military experience. Then you drill down a little more specifically to Trump. People, especially the first voting will take place in early February at the Iowa caucuses. The people who actually vote in the Iowa caucuses tend to make up their minds actually make up their minds much later in the process and much closer to the caucuses. So a lot of what you're seeing in terms of Trump's poll numbers is inflation owing to the massive media attention he's getting. If you look back 4 years, Newt Gingrich had a double-digit lead in the Republican race, and 4 years before that, it was Rudy Giuliani. Neither of them made it even close to the nomination.
But isn't the fact that there's been nobody like him in recent times, the very fact that he's so popular with so many Republicans and so potentially attractive? Here is a TV star, a multi-billionaire who's spending very little of his own money, and yet has been consistently either out in front or near the front of this race for months, despite all the commentators saying he would be a busted flush once he came under proper analysis.
There's no question that he has tapped some really repellent, nativist, xenophobic strain on the right. But
or proud Americans.
Certainly the people who support Trump would describe themselves as proud Americans, but those of us who are appalled by Trump would describe ourselves as the same. But if you look at a lot of his supporters aren't people who have turned out before, and can he actually get them to show up at the polls is a very open question. And as I said, a lot of people haven't made up their minds yet, and commentators in this country have noted that it's saying when a pollster calls up and says who you're going to vote for, A, Trump is at top of mind, and B, saying Trump is sort of like is like being able to cast a protest vote without actually having to cast a vote.
Why, if he is so potentially dangerous, if that analysis is correct, if his views are repugnant, why have all of these other Republican candidates, some of them extremely well funded and some of them very well connected, why have they failed to stop him?
Well, that's a great question. That's something I raised in a blog at usnews.com today. If you look, there have been sort of sporadic attacks on Trump. People will put out tweets saying he's unhinged, but no one has really gone after him in a methodical, sustained way and really spent money attacking him. And part of it is the conventional wisdom that every time he says something outrageous, his poll numbers go up, so people say, well, he must not be attackable. And part of it is, I think, a feeling that, well, he's going to collapse of his own weight at some point anyway, so I need to focus more on the other rivals who are more likely to be there at the end, who are actually realistic rivals. Or I don't want to, if I'm running for president in the Republican primary, I don't want to anger the people who are currently supporting Trump, so I will let him collapse of his own weight or let somebody else do the dirty work of taking him out.
What if he does get the nomination? What about the analysis that Barbara just alluded to, that he wouldn't have a hope in the general election?
I think that's correct, but of course if he gets the nomination, that means that the laws of political physics really have been suspended, so it's kind of hard to say. But as much as he excites his base, he would he would excite Hillary Clinton's, who's the likely Democratic nominee, he would excite her base as much, if not more.
What do you think America is learning about how it views its politicians and how the media treats its politicians when it comes to this amazing example of Donald Trump, which has so surprised so many commentators?
I think that we're learning some ugly things about what can get traction in this country, especially at times of great fear and anxiety and insecurity. And I think that we have to, to some extent, the media has to examine how we treat Trump. He was the Huffington Post, which is one of the biggest websites in the country. I know there's Huffington Post UK as well.
Well, they had they were treating him as entertainment.
Exactly. He was in the entertainment section, and Saturday Night Live, which is a weekly improvisational comedy skit show, had him on as a guest host a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, and you have to, at some point, he stopped being funny. And we have to examine: is there to what extent was the media coverage and the extensive media coverage and the sort of isn't he sort of funny approach? To what extent did that help him in his rise?
Well, I just wonder finally whether in fact his candidacy hasn't exposed that there are millions of Americans who feel fed up and disenfranchised and let down, not just by Washington, which is a common plea down the decades, but that there's something rotten with the political system, and Donald Trump, they believe, is their man.
Certainly there are some number of Americans who believe that, especially on the right, in the conservative wing of American politics. There's long been a sense not only of, obviously they dislike government generally, but specifically they feel like the Republican politics has been one of betrayal for decades and decades, and you've seen this exhibit itself in recent elections, especially. And then you combine that with a broader sense of there's great demographic change going on in the country, and the middle and lower middle class white voters don't have the privileged position that they used to. Increasingly, you're seeing candidates are able to rely on non-white voters as an important part of a political coalition, and Trump addresses all these things. And then you throw in Paris, you throw in San Bernardino, and the heightened anxiety and fear surrounding those events, and Trump is able to tap into that as well.
Robert Schlesinger from US News and World Report, thank you.
I think if you're the host of a morning show or a Sunday show, look at George Stephanopoulos. I've been on his show before, and I think he tried to hold Bush accountable for inaccuracies, lies about millions or thousands cheering on 9/11. But what should George have done? I would argue he should have just continued to really hold Trump accountable. Hold him accountable. Say that you're lying, because, by the way, that might lead to good ratings. But as you well know, Trump might not come back to ABC, so that hurts the ratings. But, we're sitting at CNN. It's part of a huge corporation, Time Warner, Comcast. They have business in Washington. So I think often that the system itself leads to a politeness which I don't think in these times we can afford.
Well, you say that about CNN. I have sat here and said Trump's not telling the truth about 9/11.
I don't mean just to single
but I hear
out,
what
but
you're
it
saying.
is a big media
Let me see if we can cue up in the control room a clip from this morning. This is from Meet the Press this morning. Like you were mentioning, Stephanopoulos was interviewing Trump this time last week. This morning it was Chuck Todd. And if we can, let's take a look at how how Chuck Todd handled Trump.
I've had hundreds of people call in and tweet in on Twitter saying that they saw it and I was 100% right.
Well, just because somebody repeats something doesn't make it true, and I guess that's actually that's the worst.
I don't mean I had two calls, Chuck.
Now, my sense is that Chuck Todd was trying pretty hard to challenge Trump, and Trump was giving no space there.
No space. But he did say something, Chuck Todd said something very important. When someone challenges you and you just double down, there is an art form called the big lie, which we've seen in other countries at other moments, which is very corrosive for a democracy. I do think that we're at a critical moment for the media, Brian. I think journalists can look it up. There is, you don't just say because Trump has supporters who believe in an alternate reality. Reality must be constructed with facts. And I believe that at The Nation, we have fact checkers. We also have our values, but we have facts. We begin with that. As Senator Patrick
Even though you're
Moynihan,
a liberal magazine, you base it in facts.
People have a right to their own opinions, but not to their own facts. And we're seeing that blurred now. So I think it's incumbent.
Is that still true? I mean, isn't that the question?
But I think it's incumbent upon a media,
whether,
and again, The Nation is independent. And I think what I just said about the problems with the media, I think someone on the other side of an aisle could say. But I think we're at a point in this country where silence is complicity. If you're not calling people out for inaccuracies, you call it lies, I think you're feeding increasing corrosion of our democracy. People will become more cynical. People will tune out. The media has a role to play. I may be old-fashioned, but I think we need intelligent coverage. And we also need to put it in history and perspective because, as I said, The Nation understands this is not the first time we've had a post-truth environment. Joe McCarthy we covered, Iran-Contra, Reagan, George W. Bush, Gulf of Tonkin, the LBJ. So there are issues that demand tough reporting, and the structural changes in our media haven't helped. The closure of newspapers, the decimation of newspaper teams. There's a movie out there now called Spotlight, which is about what it takes, a major newspaper, to investigate corruption and abuse in the Catholic Church. That's what needs to be done with candidates who are betraying the trust with lies.
Little